Right, so today we'll quickly go over Wesker's add-ons and sort of initial impressions of them and where I think they are right now, and what could be done to sort of like change them up, if anything at all, to make them a little bit better. Some of them obviously aren't supposed to be that great, so there's always going to be bad ones, but we can at least discuss where they can like fit in with a Wesker build or where they could fit in with a minor adjustment. Right, so first off, let's start off with the best, which is the Iridescent Ouroboros Vial. I might have pronounced that wrong. Please don't kill me for it. The simple effect of this one is the fact that it starts all survivors infected, so you don't have to go around grabbing them and then infecting them, and usually when you do that, you hit them against a wall, injure them, that sort of thing. And also, when they reach that full maximum infection, they get exposed. So this kind of turns the infection into a double threat, and an instant threat at the start. This is obviously the best because it starts off with that potential instant slowdown. A lot of time when I use this, survivors will tend to try and get rid of their infection as soon as possible, which leads to this early almost separation of survivors if they start together, and nobody's hopping onto gens instantly if they don't start together. This is quite good because Prove Thyself right now is really popular. I get it like at least every other match, if not more, and when it is, it's often on multiple survivors, assuming it's not survivor friends. So this can sort of help out with that early, because by the time you find somebody, chances are there's almost a gen completed or a gen completed because of how fast they do it with Prove Thyself these days. One of the strongest perks in the game, I think. So this can really help with that early pressure, create that instant slowdown, and kind of make it so the early game is a lot easier for Wesker because he doesn't really have anything going for him to help prevent that early game, unless you bring something like Corrupt, which I think is an okay perk on him, but most of the time you deactivate it early. Apart from because it lasts 2 minutes, but if you down somebody, it turns off early, and I find like most matches I do end up downing somebody before 2 minutes is up. So it depends on how much you think that corrupt is necessary if you want to bring that, but I would just recommend bringing this instead. It's a lot better, and it works well with powers and your other perks. So if you're trying to do your best as Wesker, you're probably bringing the Ouroboros file. And that will segue into my next best one, which is the video conference device, which increases the infection passive gain rate by 30%. Now, I did some maths on this with a friend. We found that on its own, assuming in all situations, starting with the Ouroboros file, which starts them at 0, without it, it'll take 1 minute and 20 seconds for somebody to become fully infected, which is just 10 seconds under gen completion. But with the conference device, it's 55 seconds, which is about just over half a gen. So it's quite a big difference. If you include the fact that you get when you infect somebody through grabbing them, they start at 20%, and it takes an additional 45 seconds for them to reach max infection. This causes survivors to quite frequently have to constantly disinfect themselves with the spray cans and constantly go through them really quickly. If you've got enough pressure, enough slowdown, they can go through these spray cans very quickly, and then there's nothing they can really do about this. Of course, this means you have to come up with the correct build. Make sure you're slowing them down fast enough, making sure that you leave them alone enough for them to spray themselves because it's an opportunity. And it won't be every match, and maybe not even every other match, but occasionally we'll get these matches where the survivors are still at 3 gens and they've used all the first aid sprays, and there's nothing they can do against the virus anymore, and that makes it for a really, really easy mid to late game, where most of them are infected and fully infected. So when you do grab them, they easily go down, and it's pretty great. And also when they reach that max infection, if you are there when they do or see them, you can also down them with the exposed status, assuming you're using the Ouroboros vials. It's just an overall great passive, and it increases it the most out of any of the other perks. So if you're trying to get that infection rate, this is the video conference device is what you want to go for, and I definitely recommend taking it with the Ouroboros file. So now moving into the B tier, which is the good but nothing too special tier, really. we're going for leather gloves, which decreases the recharge time of your dash. This is good because you're constantly using your power throughout the match, regardless of really what sort of playstyle you're trying to go for on Wesker here. So you really want to have it up as soon as possible. If you're hitting, you get out faster. If you're missing, you recover faster from a miss and can easily use your power again to either catch up or get another attempt into hit. It's nothing too special, but having a recharge power is always decently powerful, and you can never really go wrong with it, no matter what one you pair it with. Almost, I would say almost. Uh, so yeah, I mean, there's nothing really too much to say about it. Just it's good, and it just helps with no matter what your game plan is. So go for it. Next up is the bullhorn, which makes survivors oblivious when they use a first aid spray. This is really good because a lot of the time people can tend to get quite scared with the 40-meter tear radius, especially newbie survivors. And so not them being able to hear you will mean they might more likely to stick onto a generator, which if you're trying to approach them can be helpful. Also, it has that sort of negative side as well, like they'll stick on the generator and complete it faster. You kind of got to have I feel like you have to have like a certain build around this, one way you want to sneak up on people. There's an add-on that we'll talk about later, which reveals survivors when they use it, so it's probably pretty good paired with that. Overall, the oblivious status is quite good, especially with such a large tear radius. If you approach up from behind, people don't really expect that, especially when they first initially use it. Of course, they're aware of the oblivious status, but a lot of people, they only focus on one or two things at a time. They might assume somebody else is being chased. It's obviously not going to work too well against the survivor friends, but this assuming solo queue is here, right? You may get a couple grabs, some hits, stuff like that. Overall, I think it's a pretty good one. Oblivious status that never a bad one to have. Right. Moving on to the next one is the Chalice, Gold Chalice, which increases the extension when you grab a survivor. This is pretty good because your extension already is pretty long. So if you increase that by 50%, you're almost certain to hit something, provided you're not in like a map like Cold Wind and grab them in the middle of Corn. Plus, if you add on to the throw at the end, chances are they'll still hit something even if you don't slam it into a wall. So this is really, really good for that reason alone. It's like I said about the leather gloves. It's nothing like amazingly special. It just helps with that consistency and helping you get those damage states when you do throw, instead of throwing them, not throw, when you grab, instead of throwing them into nothing and they don't get injured, which is still good because your chances are they're out of the way, they're not near anything, you can easily get an M1 hit, but being able to hit with that dash is a lot more useful, in my opinion. So this just helps with that. Nothing too special to talk about there, but it's still good, if you ask me. On to C tier, and we get our first brown add-on, very common. As you can see here, we've got 226 of them, so you're not going to be running out of these. This increases the first dash by 20%, and then decreases the second dash by 20% itself. This makes it so the dashes are basically the same size. It can be kind of weird to feel with, and also kind of weird when you stop using it. But personally, I think this is the best brown add-on. Simply considering it makes both dashes the same size, and by making them both the same size, you have that sort of added consistency. And with how currently jagged and inconsistent the hitbox for dash could be, you end up missing a lot of hits that you don't really expect to be missing. So when you miss using this, you don't miss by as much, you don't go as far, right? Especially in like open maps and stuff. Like, if you miss in RPD, you're probably just gonna hit a wall behind them, doesn't matter too much. If you miss in Coldwind Farm or the hallway of Midwich, you're going about 2 miles past the survivor, they're off the other way, you might as well drop chase. This allows you to keep that chase up even if you do miss, and it's just a lot better, especially if you're learning. But do keep in mind that if you do learn with this and take it off, you're probably going to be feeling a bit weird for a couple of matches. Another reason why this is really good is because by default you're kind of using the first one as a set into position one, unless the person's like really fun and it really close in front of you, and the second one as a go for the survivor. For this, you can use both dashes for the same reason. It does make these really long loops a little bit less viable to use your power, but not too much. Like a lot of people underestimate how long that initial dash is, especially with the unicorn medallion. So, you know, the long loops aren't going to be like a super massive issue suddenly. They're going to be slightly more of an issue, but honestly, on those loops, chances are you're probably going to just not be using your power in most situations. Of course, it's a loop by loop basis. We can obviously go over those another time, but that's one of the other reasons why I put it so highly. On to next is the red herb, which increases the time to take to use first aid sprays by 2 seconds. Nothing to really talk about here. It's like additional slowdown for when they use sprays. If they're constantly getting infected and constantly using first aid sprays, they take longer to do it. If you mix this with the Ouroboros vial, it takes longer for them at the start of the match to start to go into gens, so that's how you should start out with an even longer initial slowdown, but I don't think that's really necessary unless you have real struggle finding survivors at the start of a match. And sometimes that just happens, it's unlucky, but it is what it is. The effect is good, it does nothing too special, and it has some synergy with other add-ons, so there's not much more to really say about that, I don't think. Alright, and then after that, we have the lab photo. The problem with this one is it takes quite a while to charge up your power, that using it to shred pallets isn't worth it, similar to say like Demo, who's one's charged up pretty fast to the point where I think it's only slightly slower, whereas Wesker's takes quite a while. You're better off just breaking the pallet, it's a lot faster. The second reason why I think it's not as strong is because if you've played Nemesis, you know that breaking pallets with your power, this frame, the exact frame they drop it, you can break the pallet. With Wesker, it's not like that. It needs to be a completed drop before you can break it. And it's not even consistent on when that is. Like, sometimes like they've dropped it like beforehand, and like I've slid off it instead of breaking it, and then I've had to just M1 it. So it's very inconsistent with how it works. I think it's a little bit buggy. It's still pretty decent, especially good on maps like the game where there's a bunch of pallets and you could just do cleanup duty. And it's good against teams that pre-drop, so that helps. But honestly, the vaulting is still pretty decent. Just on some loops, it's not as good. So this kind of counters that and makes breaking pallets easier. Other than that, it's kind of with some bug fixes to his power and his collision, it'd be a lot better. But for now, it's okay. Also, if you pick this with a Spirit Fury build, they just pre-drop all the pallets, so that's what I found. So it's like, yeah, it can work, but it's not exactly anything too amazing to cry home about. My next up is the Dark Sunglasses, which when a survivor reaches full infection, you gain undetectable status. One reason you may want to use this, and it's kind of unconventional, is the fact that when you get undetectable, you'll be able to tell when somebody's become full infection, which is very helpful if you're trying to do some plan around full infection. It's a lot of, like, maybe the Ouroboros file, you know, you become undetectable, you know somebody's full, then you can go and find them, expose them. Problem is, takes up a perk slot, not perk slot, an add-on slot, and with that, you probably want to take the one that reveals them when they when they get full infection, which is down below, but we'll get to that eventually. But it does make the full infection more obvious with the dark cloud and that sort of thing, with the icon as well. You can, if you try and do like some sort of stealth build, you can do that as well. Mix it with Tinkerers, stuff like that. You can do a lot better. But how good is undetectable on Wesker really is kind of hard to say. You can also make some surprise plays, especially in closed maps. But I think it's okay at best. You can more make some fun plays well with it with the right build, but you definitely have to have a change your gameplay and game plan around it as well. Then we got the helicopter stick, which when a survivor uses the first aid spray, they reveal it all for 8 seconds. This is okay, because you obviously get that killer instinct when they spray, so you're never going to really miss this by accident, or if you're focusing, because you're always going to hear that killer instinct. The main problem is when they're using this first aid spray, chances are they're full health, they've got no infection, and they're running off to Gen. You can pressure out Gen, but honestly, you should probably be pressuring already if you're not in a chase. And if you are in a chase, you are pressuring. So, I don't think it's that great to know where somebody is once they're fully ready for another chase, if that makes sense. So I think it's okay. Once again, especially if you've got a game plan around it, go for the bullhorn, and you can really catch people off surprise. It's definitely a good combo you have there. But yeah, it's not something too amazing that you want to be bringing every match. Once again, you don't have a game plan around it. That's kind of what this tier is. Right, so next up is the Maiden Medallion, which is when a survivor becomes fully infected, they suffer from blindness for 60 seconds. Blindness is an okay status effect. It means they can't see hooked survivors, all their aura effects stop working, apart from power ones. So this isn't really going to help against, finding spray cans to use on themselves. But it's still a decent perk, especially if you're doing well. The real problem with it is the fact that it doesn't. Most people use the spray cans before they ever reach for the infection. So the fact is that this isn't actually going to proc that many times during a match, and if it is going to proc, you're probably putting pressure on this person so they can't use the spray cans. So it's kind of a win more card or win against baby survivors. You're not really going to catch a 2,000 hour Claudette main not spraying and then not being able to unhook. They're going to maybe get affected by it once at max, and then constantly make sure that they're not going to be fully infected, so they know what's going on in the match. Which could still be good because it gets them through the first aid spray a lot faster, but still nothing too amazing if you want to do that. Once again, you probably just want to speed up the infection rate with a video conference device or something similar like that. Right, so moving on to the D tier, we've got the portable safe, which makes when a survivor is damaged by your dash, they suffer from hemorrhage. This includes throwing and also downing into a grab through either full infection or just when they're already injured. It doesn't mention this, it just says injured. It's not exactly correct. The wording's a bit weird on that one. It's still quite low just because hemorrhage only will really work if you can interrupt heals. So if you want to use this, you kind of have to take nurse's call-in so you know where people are, or be a little bit of an arse and focus people down when you see them healing, which you will do with nurse's call anyway. So it makes that easier to do. It's just if it came with Mangled, I think it'd be a lot better. I think it'd go up to mid C, personally. Hemorrhage on its own just isn't that great and isn't really worth an add-on slot when you've only got 2. So yeah, maybe if it came with Mangled, it'd be a lot better. But for now, it's kind of okay. If you have a game plan around it and perks around it, you can get some use out of it. But I honestly think there's a lot better to take. Alright, next up is the Ouroboros virus, which is when the survivor reaches full infection, aura gets revealed for 4 seconds. 1, this is not a very, very long time. 2, if you're not taking something that kind of works with it, say maybe the dark sunglasses or the iridescent Ouroboros vial, this doesn't matter much. Because a person at full infection is either fighting a first aid spray or currently using a first aid spray. So what you can actually benefit from this is not very much. And the fact is that you don't have any sort of alert. This one is when they use the first aid spray where you get a clear instinct. You always know when this is going to activate, even if you don't get any use out of it. So at least it has that going for it. With the full infection, there is no indication. You can easily miss it if you're not watching the HUD. So, you're mid-chase, you're not focusing on the HUD, something gets full infected, the aura gets revealed, and you have no idea because you weren't paying attention. Your mind was elsewhere. You're paying attention to something else, you know. So it can obviously be a bit useful if you're trying to find somebody, but at the same time, as I've said before, people tend to not let themselves get the full infection. So you're not gonna get that much use out of this unless you have a really specific build around it. And even then, I don't think that game plan is exactly that strong either. So yeah, that's my opinion on it. It can be fun, sure. Definitely can be in the right build, but it's definitely not good. And you've definitely got stronger options for yourself. Next up is the loose crank, which increases the movement speed between the first and second dash by 8%. The main problem with this is by default, you've got a second between the first and second dash before your power fades, and you gotta wait for that. You got to recharge it, in which case you don't get the speed boost. My opinion, honestly, is this and the burst tendril should just be the same one, and they change this to be something much better. Just, you know, create the extra speed in between dashes or when charging your dash, be a lot better. This is kind of good for setting up the second dash if you don't just exactly get it where you need it to be. So this is kind of sort of like a training wheel more than a loose crank, but it still does okay. Can definitely help in those tight corner maps like RPD where, you know, you need to be kind of exact. So doing quick dashes can end up leaving you just running into a wall or hitting a object in the corner. So yeah, if you tend to take your time between it, this is obviously one that can take. But personally, it's kind of more like a training wheel more than a help to the power. Right. So next up is the Lion Medallion. Hold on, let's try it. Alright, so next up is the Lion Medallion, which increases the distance which survivors are thrown by 30%. This is kind of because the thrown distance isn't very long by default. It's like 3 meters, 4 meters, I'm not sure of exact numbers, so you only gain like a meter or two on this. And honestly, it kind of pales in comparison to the much better Golden Chalice, which increases the already long extension by 50%. So if you're having troubles hitting people into walls, this will do better even for the throw distance because you have that extension of dash distance and then the throw, but this just extends the throw and by a lot less distance. So the effective distance that you can injure people is a lot less with the Lion Medallion than it is through the Chalice. So unless you're memeing around trying to do like a throw build, you know, this is okay, but it's nothing amazing. You have to have the build playstyle around it, as it seems to be in here, and even then I don't think that playstyle is even strong. I feel that most of the time you're probably going to get 1k, maybe even 0, unless you're like a really good Wesker, and even then, if you're a really good Wesker, you're probably going to be taking these two once again. Next up is what I mentioned earlier, the burst tendril, which increases your movement speed while charging the mound. This kind of makes you move just slightly slower than a survivor, if that makes sense. So you kind of have that little bit catch up sort of thing. But it's still meh because honestly the charge rate is already so slow. If you're charging up, you gotta be ready to use it. You gotta have a plan before you even press that right click button. And if you're holding that power and walking around a corner, you're probably not using the power right. And it kind of you don't want to be doing that. It's the training wheel. I'm going to call it a training wheel now. Is a lot better because it's between this the first and second dash where you might want to make corrections and stuff like that. Whereas this one is like if you're making corrections on your first dash, you shouldn't have your dash prepared. It's still alright if you're learning. It's sort of like a second training wheel. Like if you're training, if you're learning, it's good to put these two together to kind of understand where to aim, but you want to get them off as soon as possible because they're just going to be a hindrance to learning Wesker, and that's why they're so low. Last of the D tier is the Golden Egg, which increases the duration of that second window, so you can also put this with the loose crank and get that bonus movement speed for longer. This turns it from a second to a second and a half, so not very long still. Honestly, if it was 100% it'd be fine, but the problem is here is like if you're in a situation where you don't want to use a second dash, you're waiting longer for the dash to disappear and you go back up to full speed. This gives the survivors a longer distance for them to get away from you while you're recovering from the cooldown power, or kind of forces you into using it so you do recover faster, which neither you want to do. So once again, it's a sort of a training wheel, but I think it's the worst of the training wheels, sort of thing. But you can definitely get some use out of it. But like, I don't even think there's a sort of mean build you can do, because it's in between. So you can't do like a mean build where you're like, I always have my power out. Like if you're gonna do like a always have my power out build, you can take the reverse tendril. You can't. You don't get anything from this that can really help unless you, for some reason, need that extra time to set up your shot. But at that point, the survivor's probably not going to be where they want to be. So, kind of meh. Honestly, I struggled a lot with trying to decide if this was a D tier or an E tier. I kind of went with D just because it does have some use in helping people learn the power. But honestly, consider it an E tier if you know how to use Wesker. That would be my opinion. Next up is the RPD Shoulder Walkie, which decreases the initial dash by 20% and increases the second dash by 20%. This I don't think is good at all, because you make that initial get into position dash so small that you don't even get into position. You can then makes the second dash so long that if you miss, you're 20 miles away. You're not going back into that chase. You already have a really bad. If you miss currently on a big map, by default, you are going to be in a bad position already. You take this and miss, you give up on that chase. You don't bother going back to it, right? The only reason you might take this is because you're trying to make a map traversal build, because this does extend how long your dashes are effectively versus the Unicorn Medallion, which effectively shortens the total dash distance. But the problem with that is the charge up time and the cooldown time. You'll probably gain the distance, but how much distance, I don't know if matters. I think you're probably using the power incorrectly, and I feel like this encourages you to use the power wrong as Wesker. And kind of removes that ability to use it in chase unless you're really, 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 really good Wesker who wants to use it for traversal and then can use it in power consistently. But it might be better when it comes to the hitboxes getting fixed, if that ever happens. But I don't know if it would even be much better then. And right now, I just don't think it's worth the risk and not rewarding enough for a good Wesker. And yeah, it kind of encourages that bad play style of using it for distance all the time, which in some maps you're not going to be able to use it. Try using this in RPD. The only place you're going to be able to use this is in the main lobby in some situations. Or maybe like the corridors slightly. But you're in a room and you want to get to the other side of the room. There's so many objects in the way. You're not going to be able to use your power, and then you're better off taking something else in that situation. All right, next up is the green herb, the purple rarity, which annoys me that the green one isn't green rarity. Like, just swap the names, please. Whoever thought of that? God, you annoy me. But besides that, we did some testing on this. So by default, when you grab somebody, they take 20%. With this add-on, they go up to 26%. The reality is that is not a lot of percentage. Like, it sounds a lot, but really the difference is minuscule. And if you're taking something like the video conference device, you take in if you take actually anything else that infects faster, which I think is literally, if I'm remembering correctly, it's literally just a video conference device, it's a lot faster. You don't want to be taking this unless you, for some reason, want really, really fast infection rates, but and it's like a problem of, if you grab somebody twice, they go up to 52%. When they get grabbed twice. Assuming you hit this person into the wall twice, you're going to hook them, and then they go down to 50%. Like, when you hook somebody, if they're above 50% infection rate, they go down to 50%. So you've wasted 2% plus the walking, whatever passive they gained during the chase. So probably a lot more than that. The other hand on this is, if you're grabbing somebody 2 times and throwing them and not injuring them, you're probably not playing Wesker correctly. Like, the effect here is minuscule. You're playing wrong if you're trying to use this effectively, You're better off taking something else. You're literally better off taking RPD walkie, because at least I can have an interesting build around it. But the effect is so minuscule, I wouldn't bother. There is no reason to take this over the video conference device, and taking them both is just pointless, because you're gaining 6% on this, but you're gaining like 30 seconds off on this. It's just rubbish. It's so minuscule. Like, I had to actually do the maths to know how much this was doing, because when I tested it with a friend, I could not tell on the UI how much of a difference it was making. So, and the thing is, I thought it wasn't making a difference at all. Like, I'm still not convinced it's not bugged. But assuming it is working, the maths is correct off the Dead by Daylight wiki, this isn't really worthwhile compared to the much stronger perk of the video add-on video conference device. So yeah, I don't use this. Honestly, I don't recommend it. It's not even a fun one you're trying to do. You're just gonna lose, and you're just gonna be like, oh yeah, this is rubbish. But you know, if you want to use it, go for it. I'm not gonna stop you, am I? Alright, next up, and the last one, and the only one in the F tier, is the Dual Beetle, which is basically the meme add-on for Wesker. It decreases your extension by 50%, so it's the opposite of the Chalice, which increases it by 50%, and then it also gives you some extra blood points for successfully hitting your dash, which is okay. I feel like you're probably going to lose more blood points by having a shittier dash, but, you know, if you're trying to meme around, it could be an okay perk, but you definitely wouldn't use this to have a competitive edge. And I don't think I need to really go over why that's the case. Other than that, that's the entire tier list for add-ons for Wesker. Tell me what you think. Do you disagree, agree? Let me know. And yeah, thank you for watching, and hopefully you learned something here. Right, next up is the Maiden Medallion, which is when a survivor becomes fully infected, they suffer from blindness for 60 seconds. This is fine. Blindness is a decent debuff to put onto survivors, means they can't see where people are hooked. But what I would kind of prefer is when they're fully infected, they suffer from blindness until they cure. Wait, that doesn't make sense. What the fuck am I on about?